never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these posts. You know, the type where someone spills their guts about a relationship gone to hell. Yet, here I am, staring at my screen, trying to make sense of what just happened in my life. Maybe this will help someone out there, or maybe it's just for me. Either way, here's my story. Katie and I had been together for 3 years. We met during a mutual friend's game night, where she wiped the floor with me in every round of charades. She had this infectious laugh and a magnetic energy that made you feel like the only person in the room. I thought I'd hit the jackpot, beautiful, smart, and ambitious. At the time, I was laser-focused on climbing the corporate ladder, but Katie made me feel like I could loosen up and still have someone who'd be in my corner. She loved to travel, weekend getaways, girls' trips, solo road trips. I admired that about her. She was adventurous and free-spirited, the opposite of my workaholic nature. Honestly, I never questioned her trips. If anything, I envied how easily she could drop everything to recharge while I drowned in deadlines and spreadsheets. I told myself it was healthy for us to have our own interests. That's the backdrop of us. Her, the wanderlust-filled social butterfly, and me, the guy clocking extra hours to pad our savings account. I thought we were a good balance. Sure, we had our fights, but nothing major, at least not that I noticed. Looking back now, there were cracks I ignored. Tiny signs that something was off. But I was too busy chasing promotions and thinking about our future to really see them. I thought I was building a life for us, and she'd always be there, cheering me on. If only I'd known. Katie always had this charm about her. She could light up any room she walked into. I loved that she was outgoing and had a tight-knit group of friends. They were always planning something: brunches, hiking trips, beach weekends. While I was buried in work meetings and project deadlines, Katie was off making memories. I'll admit, at first, I admired how independent she was. I'd seen relationships where couples smothered each other, and I didn't want that for us. So, when she started taking trips with her friends, I encouraged it. She'd send me pictures of sunsets, cocktails, or her laughing with her friends, and it made me happy to see her enjoying life. But over time, it felt like she was always on the go. A weekend in Miami, a camping trip upstate, a work retreat that somehow had her posting pictures in a bikini by a pool. I figured she deserved it. Katie worked hard too, even if her job wasn't as stressful as mine. She was in marketing and she loved her role, but it was nowhere near as demanding as the corporate grind I was used to. Sometimes I wondered how she managed it all. The travel, the expenses, the energy. When I asked, she always laughed it off, saying she got great deals or that her friends covered for her, promising she'd pay them back later. It didn't seem like a big deal. I was so focused on my career that I didn't stop to think about how often she was gone or the fact that she rarely invited me on these trips. When she mentioned a girls' weekend or a quick getaway, I'd wave it off with a "have fun" and dive back into my spreadsheets. Maybe that's where I went wrong, being too trusting or too wrapped up in my own world to notice hers unraveling. But at the time, everything seemed normal. Katie was happy, I was grinding away at work, and our relationship felt stable. At least, that's what I told myself. Looking back, I can pinpoint when things started to shift. It wasn't one big moment, just a slow accumulation of little things that didn't make sense until much later. Katie became distant. Not in an obvious way, but in the kind that creeps up on you. She'd be on her phone more often, angling it away when I passed by. Our conversations, once lively and full of plans for the future, started feeling surface level. She was distracted, like her mind was somewhere else even when she was sitting right in front of me. I remember one night in particular. We were supposed to have dinner together, just the two of us, a rare break from my packed schedule. I'd picked up her favorite sushi and even cleaned up the apartment. But when she came home, she looked exhausted and barely touched her food. She spent most of the evening scrolling through her phone, nodding absent-mindedly whenever I tried to talk. "Just tired," she mumbled when I asked if something was wrong. "Long day at work." At the time, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Everyone has off days. But then those days turned into weeks. Her trips became more frequent, her explanations more vague. She stopped texting me cute updates when she was away, like she used to. I'd get generic responses if I asked how her day was going, sometimes hours later. Even at home, things felt different. She started dressing up more often. Not that she didn't always look great, but these outfits weren't her usual style. Tighter dresses, heels for casual dinners, new lingerie that she'd barely let me see, let alone touch. And then there were the lies. At first, they were small, like saying she had a late meeting, but when I called her office, they said she'd left hours ago. Or mentioning a night out with friends and then forgetting which friend when I casually asked about it later. It wasn't like I didn't trust her. I had no reason to suspect anything serious. But something was off. The connection we once had, the closeness, was slipping away. I chalked it up to us being busy or going through a rough patch. Relationships aren't always perfect, right? Still, a small part of me wondered, was this normal? Or was there something I didn't want to see? It wasn't like I went looking for proof. I didn't even think there was anything to find. At least not at first. But you know how they say your gut never lies? Turns out they're right. The first clue was a stray receipt I found while cleaning up one Saturday morning. Katie had left for another one of her girls' trips, and I thought I'd surprise her by tidying up. I was sorting through the stack of papers on the kitchen counter when I noticed it. A receipt for a hotel bar tab. It wasn't the receipt itself that caught my attention. It's not like Katie never went out, but the date didn't add up. It was from a weekend she told me she'd be at her best friend Rachel's cabin. According to her, there wasn't even cell service there, which explained why she'd been unusually hard to reach. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe the girls had stopped at a hotel on the way. Maybe I was overthinking. But then there was the second clue. A week later, Katie left her laptop open while she was in the shower. I wasn't snooping, I swear. I was just grabbing my own laptop from the coffee table. But there it was, her email inbox glowing on the screen. My eyes skimmed over it without meaning to, but one email stood out. "Can't wait to see you again," followed by a winky face emoji. The sender's name wasn't familiar, and for a moment, I froze. My heart started racing, but I told myself it could be a misunderstanding. Maybe it was work-related or a friend being playful. But as I hovered over the email, I noticed it had no subject line and was marked as read. When Katie came back from the bathroom, I casually asked if we could plan a trip together soon. Just the two of us. She didn't even look up from drying her hair. "Sure, babe. We'll figure something out," she said, her tone dismissive. Something was gnawing at me, but I didn't know what to do. Confront her? About what? A receipt and a cryptic email? I knew how ridiculous that sounded. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. So I decided to wait and watch. If something was happening, I'd find out. And if not, well, at least I could stop driving myself crazy. But deep down, I already knew. I just didn't want to admit it. Not yet. Once the suspicion took root, it consumed me. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who snoops or assumes the worst. But every time I brushed it off, something else would pop up. Another excuse, another strange behavior, another unanswered question. I started paying closer attention. Not outright spying, but noticing the details I used to ignore. Like how Katie's trips were always last-minute plans now, with vague reasons why I couldn't come along. Or how she'd get oddly defensive when I asked what she'd been up to. Then there was her phone. She used to leave it lying around the apartment without a second thought. Lately, it was either in her hand or face down on the table, and her notifications were mysteriously silent. I didn't want to cross the line, but the cracks were turning into gaping holes I couldn't ignore. One night, she fell asleep on the couch after drinking a little too much wine. Her phone buzzed, and instinct took over before I could stop myself. The message was from someone saved as Taylor. It read, "Miss you already. Can't wait till next time." My stomach dropped. Taylor wasn't a name I recognized, but the tone wasn't friendly, it was intimate. The kind of message you don't send to just anyone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled up. Most of the thread was deleted, but a few stray messages remained. "Last weekend was amazing. When are you free again?" And the one that hit me hardest, "You're worth the risk." I locked the phone and sat back, my mind racing. Risk? What risk? Was this a coworker? Someone from her trips? My thoughts spiraled, and I had to step outside to calm down. Over the next few days, I kept my cool around Katie, but I couldn't stop digging. I checked her social media, scanned her stories for anything out of place. Most of it looked harmless, pictures with friends, group shots. But one detail stood out. In a photo she posted from her last trip, there was a reflection in a window. It wasn't a girl taking the picture. It was a man. I didn't know who he was or what he meant to her, but my gut told me this wasn't just casual flirting. Something was going on, and I was done ignoring it. If I was going to confront her, I needed more than vague suspicions. I needed proof, and I wasn't stopping until I got it. Took me a few days to work up the courage, but I couldn't keep playing dumb. Every time Katie laughed at something on her phone or casually mentioned her plans, my blood boiled. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by staying silent. She was sitting on the couch scrolling through Netflix when I brought it up. I kept my tone calm, like I was just curious. "Hey, who's Taylor? I saw a text pop up on your phone the other night." Her reaction was immediate, too immediate. She stiffened and then gave a forced laugh. "Taylor? Oh, that's just a coworker. We're working on a campaign together." I studied her, trying to keep my expression neutral. "A campaign that involves missing each other and talking about risks?" Her face paled. She opened her mouth to respond, but then snapped it shut. That was the first crack in her armor, and I pressed on. "Katie, what's going on? You've been acting different, distant. And this Taylor person, are you seriously going to tell me it's just work?" She stood up, crossing her arms defensively. "Why are you even looking at my texts, Anthony? That's an invasion of privacy." Her deflection only confirmed what I already knew. "I wasn't snooping," I shot back. "Your phone buzzed, and I saw the message. You've been lying to me, haven't you?" Katie scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You're overreacting. There's nothing going on." But her voice wavered, and I caught it. "Then show me your phone," I said, holding my hand out. She hesitated, clutching it tighter. "Why should I have to prove anything to you? Don't you trust me?" Her words stung, but I didn't back down. "I used to, but right now you're giving me every reason not to." The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. She stared at me, her jaw tight, before finally spitting out, "Fine. If you don't trust me, then maybe this isn't working anymore." With that, she stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, my chest heaving with anger and disbelief. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to convince me otherwise. I knew I'd hit a nerve, but I didn't have the full truth yet, and something told me it was going to be worse than I imagined. The confrontation left a bitter taste in my mouth, but it didn't give me closure. Katie's reaction, defensive, evasive, and full of excuses, only deepened my suspicions. I decided to give her space, hoping she'd come clean on her own. But days turned into weeks, and instead of honesty, there was an icy silence between us. Then, everything changed. It started with a message from an old mutual friend, Claire. We weren't close, but we followed each other on social media. That day, she sent me a DM that simply read, "I think you should see this." Attached was a link to a private video uploaded to a social account I didn't recognize. At first, I hesitated. The title was vague, but my gut told me it wasn't going to be good. My hands shook as I clicked the link, and when the video began to play, my stomach dropped. It was Katie. She was at what looked like a villa or beach house, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. Music blared in the background, drinks flowed freely, and everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives. Katie was in the center of it all, laughing, dancing, and looking far too close to a man I'd never seen before. But it didn't stop there. As the video went on, the scene shifted. The camera, held by someone who clearly had no shame, captured Katie and several others slipping away into a private room. What happened next left no room for doubt. She wasn't just cheating on me with one person. She was involved in something more, something I hadn't even allowed myself to imagine. I slammed my laptop shut, bile rising in my throat. My mind raced as I tried to process what I'd just seen. Anger, humiliation, and heartbreak collided in a storm I couldn't contain. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a choice, a series of choices. For a few moments, I sat in stunned silence, my thoughts spiraling. I knew I couldn't ignore this, couldn't pretend it didn't exist. But how do you confront someone with evidence like that? How do you even begin to pick up the pieces of your life after something like this? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing. This was the end of whatever I thought we had. I didn't say anything to Katie right away. Instead, I let the anger simmer, focusing on the practical steps I needed to take. I'd already decided our relationship was over, but I wanted her to admit the truth before I made my move. That night, Katie came home late as usual. She walked in with a forced smile, acting like nothing was wrong. I couldn't take it anymore. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but cold. Her expression shifted immediately. Her eyes narrowed, and she set her bag down slowly. "What now, Anthony?" she asked, feigning exasperation. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I know everything, Katie. About the trips, the other people. I've seen the video." For a moment, she froze, her face betraying a flicker of panic before she quickly masked it. "What video?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "The one where you're in that beach house with God knows how many people. It's all there, Katie. The lies, the cheating. It's all out in the open." Her face crumbled for a split second, but then she straightened, crossing her arms defensively. "So what if I was? You've been so busy with your job, obsessed with your career, barely paying attention to me. What did you expect?" Her words stung, but I didn't let them distract me. "Don't blame this on me," I shot back. "You could have talked to me, told me how you felt. Instead, you chose to lie and cheat. With how many people, Katie? Was it worth it?" Katie sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "You wouldn't understand," she muttered. "Try me," I said, my voice like ice. She hesitated, then blurted out, "Fine.
I'm bisexual. Okay.
I've always known it, but I didn't know how to tell you. And these trips, they were a way for me to explore that part of myself, to figure out who I really am." Her confession hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't the fact that she was bisexual. It was the way she used it to justify betraying me. As if her self-discovery gave her a free pass to destroy our relationship. "You think that makes this okay?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You think using me as a safety net while you explore is fair?" Katie didn't answer. She just looked at me, defiant but cornered, like she was daring me to argue further. I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "You've made your choices, Katie, and now I'm making mine." Her face twisted with panic. "Anthony, wait." But I didn't wait. I walked out of the room, knowing there was no coming back from this. I don't think I slept that night. Not really. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every word of Katie's confession echoing in my head. Bisexual. Self-discovery. You wouldn't understand. She was right. I didn't understand. Not the cheating, not the lies, not how she could justify tearing our relationship apart under the guise of figuring herself out. I wanted to be angry, but mostly I felt hollow. The kind of emptiness that comes when something you thought was solid turns out to be a lie. I replayed every moment of our relationship, searching for signs I'd missed. Had she always been unhappy? Was this my fault? Then the other emotions started creeping in: humiliation, betrayal, disgust. Knowing that other people might have seen that video made my stomach churn. How could she let things get to that point? How could she do this to me, to us? I thought about the future I'd imagined with her. The house, the vacations, the stability. All of it was gone now, tainted by her choices. By morning, the emptiness gave way to anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, determined sort. I wasn't going to let her play the victim here. She could cry about self-discovery all she wanted, but the fact remained. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and humiliated me. Katie tried to talk to me the next day, but I shut her down. I didn't have the energy for another argument or another excuse. I told her I needed space, but what I really needed was clarity. Over the next few days, I withdrew from her completely. I didn't want her explanations or her apologies. I started thinking about what I needed to do next, how to protect myself and rebuild my life without her. The hardest part was fighting the shame. I couldn't stop wondering what people would think if they knew. Would they pity me? Laugh at me behind my back? I hated the thought of being that guy, the one who didn't see it coming. But then I realized something. Katie's actions weren't a reflection of me. They were a reflection of her. Her lies, her selfishness, her betrayal. That was on her, not me. That thought became my anchor, the thing that kept me from spiraling. I didn't deserve this. I wasn't going to let her destroy my self-worth along with our relationship. If she wanted to figure out who she was, fine. She could do it on her own. After days of silence, Katie finally broke the uneasy truce. She cornered me in the living room, her face a mix of defiance and desperation. "We can't keep living like this, Anthony. We need to talk." I set down my coffee and looked at her, cold and unflinching. "Fine. Let's talk. But I'm done with the excuses, Katie. Tell me the truth. Everything." Her mouth opened, then closed, her confidence wavering. She sat on the edge of the couch, fiddling with her hands. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she began. "It just happened." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, spare me. Affairs don't just happen. You made choices, Katie." Repeatedly. She flinched but pressed on. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I swear I didn't think it would go this far. But then I felt trapped, like I couldn't stop without ruining everything." "Ruining everything?" I snapped. "Katie, you already ruined it. Do you even hear yourself? You didn't stop because you didn't want to stop. Admit it." Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't move me. I'd seen this act before, the waterworks she used to escape accountability. Not this time. She hesitated, then finally said, I felt like I wasn't myself anymore. Like I was losing who I was. And those trips, those people, they gave me something I felt like I was missing." Her words hit me like a slap, but not because I believed them. They were just another excuse, another way to shift the blame. "So what was I? A placeholder? A safety net while you found yourself?" She didn't answer, but her silence said enough. I stood, pacing the room to keep from shouting. "You know what? I'm done trying to understand you. I've spent the past few years working my ass off for us, trusting you, believing in you, and this is how you repay me? With lies and group sex on your trips." She gasped at the mention of the video, her face turning crimson. "You weren't supposed to see that," she whispered. "That's what you're worried about?" I roared. Not the betrayal, not the humiliation, but the fact that I found out? Jesus, Katie, do you even hear yourself? Her tears spilled over then, but I didn't care. I was past the point of sympathy. "I gave you everything, Katie. Everything. And you threw it away for what? A few cheap thrills and a shot at playing someone you're not." She sobbed, reaching out to grab my arm. "Please, Anthony, we can fix this. I'll stop, I'll go to therapy, whatever you want. Just don't give up on us." I pulled away, my voice calm but firm. "There's no us anymore. You made sure of that." Her cries followed me as I walked out of the room, but I didn't look back. I knew there was no saving what we had, no undoing the damage she'd caused. This was the end, and for the first time I felt the weight lifting. Not all of it, but enough to take the first step forward. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The pain was still there, but the haze of confusion and disbelief had lifted. I knew what I needed to do. Katie had taken so much from me. My trust, my peace of mind, my sense of stability. But she wasn't going to take anything else. While she was out, I gathered everything I'd given her over the years. The designer bags, the expensive jewelry, even the gadgets I'd bought her when I was trying to make her life easier. It all went into boxes. I didn't do it out of spite. Okay, maybe a little. But mostly, I did it because it was a reminder of how much I'd poured into a relationship that turned out to be a lie. These things were symbols of my effort, my care, my belief in her. She didn't deserve to keep them. When Katie came home and saw the boxes, she froze in the doorway. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I didn't sugarcoat it. It's everything I gave you. Pack it up, because it's not yours anymore." She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. "You can't be serious, Anthony. You can't just take everything back like this." I met her gaze, unflinching. "Watch me." Her shock quickly turned to anger. "This is petty and ridiculous. You think taking my stuff is going to make you feel better?" I shrugged. "Maybe not. But it'll make sure I'm not the one left picking up the pieces while you move on like nothing happened." Katie tried to argue, throwing out every excuse and manipulation she could think of. She called me controlling, said I was overreacting, even accused me of being heartless. But I stood firm. By the time she stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Power. Not over her, but over myself. For the first time, I was reclaiming my narrative, refusing to let her dictate how this story ended. I didn't stop with the material things, either. I started going through our joint accounts, separating my finances from hers. I canceled the credit card she used for her trips and contacted the landlord to have her name removed from the lease. This wasn't just about taking back what was mine, it was about setting boundaries. Katie had taken enough. She didn't get to have the best of both worlds anymore. By the end of the day, I felt lighter. There was still a long road ahead, but I was finally taking the first steps. And for the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Katie moved out the following week. She didn't have much of a choice, given that I'd taken her name off the lease and cut off her financial lifelines. At first, she acted defiant, telling me she'd be fine on her own, that I'd regret this decision. But it didn't take long for reality to catch up with her. The version of Katie that thrived on social media and lavish trips was gone. Without my financial support, she quickly reverted to the life she had before we met. A broke grad student barely scraping by. The expensive clothes, the trendy nights out, the adventures. All of it disappeared as fast as I'd packed her things. Mutual friends started reaching out, mostly out of curiosity. "What happened?" they'd ask. "Katie's been off lately." I didn't give them the full story. I didn't see the point in airing our dirty laundry. But word traveled fast, and it wasn't long before people started piecing things together. Katie's new lifestyle didn't sit well with her. She tried reaching out a few times, leaving voicemails filled with excuses and half-hearted apologies. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Anthony," she'd say. "I was just lost. Can't we talk about this?" But I didn't call her back. What was there to say? I'd already heard every excuse, every justification. I wasn't going to let her pull me back into her chaos. The last time I saw her was by chance, at a coffee shop near campus. She looked tired, her once flawless appearance replaced by something raw and unpolished. She didn't notice me, and I didn't go out of my way to make my presence known. It struck me how different she seemed, how different we seemed. When we were together, I thought she was this untouchable, larger-than-life person. Now she was just human, flawed, vulnerable, and paying the price for her choices. I didn't feel triumphant seeing her like that. If anything, it was sobering. This wasn't the Katie I fell in love with, but maybe she never had been. Maybe I'd just been too blind to see the cracks before they turned into fissures. I walked out of the coffee shop that day with a strange sense of peace. Katie's downfall wasn't something I celebrated, but it wasn't my responsibility anymore. She made her choices and I made mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. After Katie was gone, the silence in the apartment was deafening. At first, it felt like relief, no more tension, no more arguments. But as the days stretched on, the quiet began to feel like a mirror, forcing me to confront the part one played in how everything fell apart. The truth was I'd been blind, not just to Katie's betrayal, but to the cracks in our relationship long before she crossed the line. I told myself I was focused on our future, working hard so we could build a life together. But in doing so, I ignored what was right in front of me. I realized how much of myself I'd tied to my career and financial success. I thought I was doing it for us, but really I was doing it for me to prove something, to feel worthy. And in the process, I'd left Katie to her own devices, not realizing how far apart we'd grown. That didn't excuse what she did, of course. Her lies and betrayal were entirely her own fault. But it forced me to ask some hard questions. If I wanted a real, honest relationship in the future, how could I avoid making the same mistakes? The first step was redefining what mattered to me. I started spending less time at work, cutting back on the extra hours that had consumed my life. I took up hobbies I'd neglected, hiking, reading, even cooking. Felt strange at first, having so much free time. But slowly, I began to rediscover parts of myself I hadn't paid attention to in years. I also started talking to a therapist. At first, I thought it was just to process the betrayal, but it turned into something deeper. I started unpacking my fear of failure, my need to overachieve, and the way those things had shaped my relationships. One of the most surprising lessons I learned was that forgiveness wasn't about Katie. It was about me. I wasn't forgiving her for her sake. I was doing it so I could let go of the anger and bitterness that had been weighing me down. As weeks turned into months, I started to feel lighter. The pain of what Katie did was still there, but it wasn't consuming me anymore. I wasn't just surviving, I was growing. By the time I finally cleared out the last of her things, I didn't feel the anger or heartbreak I'd expected. I felt gratitude, not for what she did, but for what I'd learned about myself because of it. Katie's betrayal was a wound, but it wasn't going to define me. I was determined to come out of this stronger, wiser, and more grounded than I'd ever been before. The closure didn't come all at once. It wasn't a dramatic moment or a sudden epiphany. It came in small, almost unnoticeable ways. It was in the first morning I woke up and didn't immediately think about Katie or what she'd done. It was in the laugh I shared with a coworker over lunch, realizing I hadn't felt that light in months. It was in the quiet evenings spent reading or listening to music, finally at peace in my own company. I started reconnecting with old friends, people I'd unintentionally pushed away while I was buried in my career and my failing relationship. They didn't pry, didn't ask for the messy details, they just showed up. We'd grab drinks, watch a game, or sit on someone's back porch, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. One night, after a long conversation with one of my closest friends, I realized something that had been nagging at the back of my mind. Katie and I had never truly been compatible. Sure, there was passion in the beginning and we made sense on paper. But at our core, we wanted different things. She craved freedom and adventure, while I valued stability and growth. We tried to bridge the gap, but in the end, it wasn't enough. And that was okay. I wouldn't say I forgave her entirely, not in the way people think of forgiveness. But I let go of the anger. I stopped replaying the betrayal in my head, stopped wondering what if, or blaming myself for not seeing the signs. The biggest moment of closure came unexpectedly, about 6 months later. I ran into Katie at a mutual friend's party. She looked different, tired, a little worn down, but still carrying that same air of confidence she always had. We exchanged a few awkward pleasantries, avoiding the elephant in the room. But before she left, she pulled me aside. "I'm sorry, Anthony," she said quietly, "for everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed to say it." I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't feel anger or hurt. I felt nothing, and in that nothingness, I found peace. "Take care of yourself, Katie," I said, and with that I walked away, leaving the past exactly where it belonged, behind me. Closure, I realized, wasn't about her words or her apology. It was about me deciding to move forward. And in that moment, I knew I already had. It's strange, looking back now, how much my life has changed since everything fell apart. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were nights when the weight of betrayal felt suffocating, and days when I questioned everything. But here I am, on the other side of it, stronger than I ever thought I could be. If you're reading this because you've been where I was, let me tell you what I've learned. First, trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. I spent so much time brushing off my gut feelings, telling myself I was imagining things. But your intuition is there for a reason, listen to it. Second, don't let someone else's betrayal define your worth. When Katie's lies came to light, I blamed myself. I thought I wasn't enough, that I'd driven her away. But the truth is, her choices were hers. They had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her own issues. Third, set boundaries and stick to them. When I finally started taking back control of my finances, my time, my emotions, I realized how much power I'd given away. You don't have to be cruel or vindictive, but you do have to stand up for yourself. Fourth, don't rush forgiveness. It's a process, not a switch you can flip. I didn't forgive Katie right away, and I'm not sure I ever fully will. But I forgave myself for trusting her, for loving her, for believing in her. And that forgiveness was what set me free. Lastly, know that healing is possible. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always linear. There will be setbacks and moments of doubt. But if you keep moving forward, even if it's just one step at a time, you'll get there. Now, I'm not here to say I have all the answers. I'm still figuring things out, still learning what I want and need from life and relationships. But for the first time in a long time, I'm hopeful. To anyone going through something similar, just remember, this isn't the end of your story. It's a chapter, one that hurts, sure, but also one that will shape you in ways you can't yet see. Take your time, trust yourself, and above all, keep moving forward.